What's your favorite thing about water?
My favorite is
Do you like the way it feels all over your body? Do you like the way it looks? See how the water, it shines and you can see the water flowing and it's never really stopping moving, right? So the reason for us wanting Anders to have long hair, well, it is a lot of work. We find that the more connected he is to our culture and the more he's able to see himself as a young Cree male, we find that his well-being is better. His mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And so I remember I grew up with a braid. I had a braid until I was 19 years old. And I just remembered, like, every single day I would take my time. I'd have to rebraid it, which really taught me patience, taught me how to take my time and be gentle with myself, because I find that's one thing us males we kind of struggle with, is that ability to really just allow ourselves to be gentle. And so when I braid his hair, I'm not trying to be like rough or too forceful. I braid his hair every single day. And so in the mornings, my son doesn't talk very much. And it's a good time for me to be able to ask him questions about what he expects for the day. His, I guess, comprehension or how he understands things is really good. And so I'll ask him questions like, what are you excited about for today? Are you excited to go to school? And most times he says yes, sometimes he does say no. Or ask him what his favorite foods are. And it's really just trying to get him to kind of verbalize what's going on in his mind. Our children are gifted to us, and spiritually speaking, our children, they actually choose their parents spiritually. And so when that child chooses his parents, it's up to the parent to kind of guide and support that child. But for autistic people, what happens is that a piece of their spirit actually stays in that spiritual world. And so they're much more connected to that world than anybody else. And so when I think about when my son was diagnosed, and I remember like feeling almost like my heart sank, right? I was sad. And I reflected on that, like, why would I feel like that? Because he was diagnosed as autistic. And then I think about if I would have had the knowledge of that cultural perspective, I don't think my heart would have sank. And so one thing I'm learning is that through the culture, we're really trying to use it to address the stigma that these diagnoses can have, right? Because the stigma is a huge barrier for some of our families to getting a diagnosis, because they don't want to deal with, judgment. They don't want to deal with non-Indigenous healthcare providers. And some parents, unfortunately, feel like it's their fault. And when I teach them about the more spiritual intelligence approach, there's a lot more, I think, buy-in. And people are just more willing to say, okay, that's my child. Yes, they may be autistic, but it's still my child. And my child is spiritually gifted now. You hiding? Huh? You hiding? Okay, buddy.
Autism is actually a complex spectrum of disorders where there's issues with social communication and really with emotion being a second language for kids. So they're not intuitively picking up what other people are communicating with facial expressions or language. And they struggle in turn to communicate back to people what they're feeling and to advocate for their needs. And again, it's a spectrum. So some children are verbal and able to learn that expression and learn those social skills, and some children are nonverbal. And we need to be creative in figuring out how to help them express themselves and become the best version of themselves that they can be. And then there's all kinds of other little pieces to autism that include restricted interests. Sometimes they can have behaviors that they use to communicate what they need, but are termed self-stim behaviors where they're trying to express that they're excited by flapping their hands or turning in circles. And those are all just uniquenesses of those kids. I like to think about autism. It's a way that we as professionals communicate, but I don't like to use it as a label for kids to restrict who they can become, because my job as a physician is to walk the journey with kids and their families to help them become the best version of themselves that they can be. It's really easy to assume that when people come to us with their children that they want a diagnosis and they want a label. And in the autism journey, particularly with families in Maskwacis, I have learned that that label isn't always as important to families as it is to me. And so I have had to learn to be very, again, quiet, to listen to the families for when they're ready. They love their kids just the way they are. And sometimes it's just me that has those concerns, or sometimes it's just the school that has those concerns. And they're celebrating their kids for everything they are, even though they're struggling with some of those developmental tasks. And I have to be patient and wait for them to be ready to engage in that conversation about diagnosis. And that can be a really long, hard wait for me, but watching them love their kids and celebrate everything they do is also an amazing gift.
Anders has an older sibling who's autistic, but one thing we say is when you meet one autistic person, you've just met one autistic person. And so me and his mom, we didn't know much about it then. And his older brother was diagnosed late in grade 2 because his autism was, he could hide it really well. And so for him, he'd get overwhelmed with a lot of the sensory challenges he has. So like he would go to music class and it'd just be too much. He can't go to like hot tubs or anything. It's just way too much for his sensory. And so I was kind of like on high alert for Anders. And so for me, Anders wasn't really talking until he still doesn't talk very much, but he wasn't saying very many words by the time he was 2.5 actually. And so that's when I decided I was going to go ahead and just put him on the wait list. So here in Alberta, there's about a 1.5 year wait list to get your child assessed. And I knew that, and I didn't want him going too long without an assessment, because I know that when it comes to early intervention or getting him the services he needs, you need a diagnosis. And so I put him on the wait list at the Glen Rose Hospital. And so we waited, it was a year then. We waited the year, got him assessed. I don't think he got diagnosed until he was 3.5, just because the year-long wait. And then he was living with his mom then, but we really I knew I needed to get him the services he needs. And so that's one of the main challenges I find our families have. If you live on a reserve in a First Nations community, the jurisdictional disputes between the federal, which is where most of the funding should be coming from, and the province, which is where the services are housed, there's a lot of fighting there. And for us, we needed to be able to get him what's known as here as an FSED contract. And so this is basically early intervention. I wanted to make sure that he had all the services he needed, but we couldn't get those on the reserve. So we had to make a really hard decision to him come live with us in Edmonton. And on top of that, when I was finishing my master's, I was like, okay, my second son was just diagnosed, and I went to go do my own research on it, right? Like I had all these new research skills that I really wanted to use, and when I went to go do the research on it, I found that there's very little research done in this area, especially for Indigenous populations in Canada. And so that led me to do my PhD now, and that's where I'm at. So my PhD research is on autism in First Nations communities. And I think at the end of the day, what I really just want to be is a good father. That's my main objective every day. But also be able to, support all of my children through whatever they're going through, right?
What grade are you in?
2.
What's your teacher's name?
19.
Okay, what's your dad's name?
Dada.
Is it Grant? What's your last name? Anders what? Anders Bruno?
In the
What's your favorite color?
my favorite color is blue.
Blue? That's a good color. I like that color.
Sometimes we'll get referrals from doctors, house nurses, the school, or even just the family themselves. And so I tend to find that because there's no supports for autism on the reserve, that we're kind of just, families don't realize their children have autism till they get to school, until they get to school age. And so I felt the gap was early intervention, 0 to 4, was missing. And so we created autism support groups that we're probably about 6 months in now, which have them monthly. And we assist families getting diagnosis if they just see the symptoms of a child that they feel has autism. And so we'll help them, like we'll assist them get to places that they need to be for a diagnosis. Alberta Health Services will collect data of special needs children, but they don't separate on and off reserve. And so when that comes to creating programs at our level where it's like chief and council, there's nothing on paper for them to see how many children on the reserve have special needs. And so that creates a barrier for us because we can't gauge how much money is supposed to be put towards special needs. And so we want that, I guess, somewhere along the way to have some kind of database, whether it be, kept provincially or locally. I feel like it should be done locally just because we know what's needed for ourselves and that we can hold that information because it's our people. And so I feel like, data collection is a big thing because it's going to paint the picture that we need to see for everybody to understand that it's bigger than they actually know to think about, like program creation, services and, resources that should be available on reserve. And so that could be, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. Those things should be available to us on reserve. And so I feel like if we had that data, it would just be that foundation to build those things and bring that for our people.
Historically, the tea dance ceremony is called Kiskwepeta. What I'm sharing with you is it's something that's going to be difficult for the general audience to understand because we believe in spirituality. We're asking our ancestors we have a personal relationship with. And so we're doing that, and we call them to help us. And sometimes they come, sometimes 1, 2, 3. But we have to give them permission to come. We have to ask them to come. We can't just say, expect them to show up. We ask certain people, ancestors, to come, and if we give them that permission by asking them, they'll come.
I've always learned that through ceremony, like ceremonies should be a very inclusive space, and usually they are. So like the example I'll use is I was taught that as soon as you hear about a ceremony, that's your invite. Like you don't need a formal text or call or email. As soon as you hear about it, you're invited. But at the same time, I know that for my sons, to bring them into like a sweat lodge would be next to impossible, just because it's way, way too intense for them. And so I've always tried to look for more adapted or modified versions. And so we're planning a tea dance ceremony next month to really allow families to show up just how they are and letting them know that this isn't going to be a place of judgment. You're not going to get turned away. I'm going to let, the pipe carriers know that we're going to have, autistic children here. So we got to be mindful of, just being patient. And if children are running around, just let them. Like, we're not there to control anybody. The other thing that's happening on that day, actually, it's going to be Anders' 8th birthday that day. And so we're going to be having a giveaway. We're going to be obviously celebrating that with him. And so for us to be able to have that type of ceremony in our community is going to be really special because, a lot of these ceremonies were outlawed and some of them were almost lost. These tea dance ceremonies, there's only like 1 or 2 families that were still doing them at one point. And so for them to be able to come back and be revived, and for me to be able to experience that with my family is going to be amazing.
Can I throw one? I'm going to throw one too. Better grab some. Oh, almost. Can I get in the water?